If you have complex anxiety, you'll also need an environment or a mindset that will facilitate its continuation. And I think this is why, although complex anxiety and OCD are prevalent all around the world, it's rarer in cultures where there are fewer family and social security safety nets, because the family just wouldn't tolerate such behavior, or they'd been thrown out, or they would starve to death by not taking responsibility for themselves. Now, one more observation about complex anxiety is that very often the person has the dominance and control to be rude and aggressive to those who are supporting them. However, they're very uncomfortable doing the same thing to strangers, as they have a sort of disproportionate need to be liked. And of course, this needs to be reversed. As those who are prepared to look after you, I think, should be treated with love and respect for putting up with all your drama. And for everybody else, what they think of you is none of your business, and you should let it go. So as I learned this information, much of which was not taught in psychology books or any therapy accreditation courses, I felt compelled to capture and record it so this 20% might feel better understood and my concepts wouldn't be lost upon my demise. And if we expand my theory, it's my guess that of the 20% of the people whose brains are wired up differently, 80% of them would use their talents in ways that were positive, kind, loving and inclusive, while the other 20% would be more negative, combative, violent, selfish and intrusive. Once again, to me, this is just how nature seems to operate. Obviously, this is only a metaphor, it's only a model, but it works for me to keep my brain quiet from asking too many why questions. Why do bad things happen to good people? Or why do people do what they do? I think this diversity is nature's dance between good and bad, dark or light, right or wrong, fast or slow, and it just keeps our species on their toes so we don't become complacent, and we do keep growing. So that's the sort of story I tell myself. That's the story my rider has programmed into his little horse's inner reality to quieten his unconscious brain down. However, if I reflect back to before I knew all this stuff, and if you're under 35 and you're watching this, you've already got a head start on me, because that was not the story I had running in my brain back then. My brain was wrapped up in my angry, victim-based anxiety stories, and my brain was always pessimistically and fearfully talking me out of doing things rather than optimistically talking me into doing them. And back then, I was besieged by thoughts about what was the right thing to do, what was legal, what was kind, what was good, what was fair, what was safe, what was appropriate, what if you did this bad thing, blah, 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 blah. Rather than thinking what was the right thing for me and what might my soul actually need. Back then, I felt like I had to have a complete plan or to fully understand something and to learn all the required skills before I could step forward and take on a project or commit to taking action. And I used to think that individuals who appeared to be successful were either fortunate enough to access resources such as money, land and property, or they had natural talent, or they had a clear sense of direction which allowed them to start working on a project immediately. But I discovered that that wasn't necessarily true. But what they did have was a dream. They had a desire of how they wished their lives to be, or what they dreamed their lives might look like. And they took complete responsibility for doing their best to make that happen, no matter what their brain was saying, or no matter how nervous or anxiety-ridden their bodies felt. So if I back up a little and step back a dozen years or so, I had desensitized my bodily responses. I had ERP'd my brain into optimism and trust. I'd learned where my boundaries of responsibility were. I'd changed my profession. I'd built up a huge amount of experiential knowledge by working not just with anxious people, but the most complicated anxious people I could find. I really wanted to grow. I really wanted to test myself. And I had a deep, deep urge to capture all my knowledge into a book. But each time I sat down to try and write that book, I struggled to find the true message that I wished to express. And I just floundered around, procrastinating and basically frustrating myself. Should the book be about anxiety or OCD, about depression? Should it be about personality types? Should it be about relationships? And what about all the books already talking about these things? You know, the options were too broad and too varied, and I kept overwhelming myself with the enormity of the task. Plus, because I wasn't a doctor and because I wasn't medically trained in any capacity, my brain kept telling me that I was a fraud, even though I'd helped myself and many others to find calmness when the conventional medical profession had failed. And other elements that deeply troubled me too were because I had 4 topics which had facilitated the most change in me. And these 4 topics were never mentioned in the mainstream psychology or in conventional therapy circles. And these topics were seeing the world as it really was rather than I'd been trained to see it, developing a faith that my soul was eternal and there was more to my life than just this particular brief period between birth and death, thinking in terms of energy and every atom everywhere being connected and in constant communication, and using common sense and intuition over and above my ego-based programmed intellect, which thought it knew everything, but as I found out, was unbelievably naive. And I worried about how I might write about these complex and inexplicable topics in an intelligent way and a logical way that a rational person would listen to me without thinking I was some kind of nut job or a cult leader. You see, that since the late 90s, I've been drawn into the world of what are now called conspiracy theories. And due to my love of research and my innate need to test things, I'd gone down many, many rabbit holes, exploring everything I could about psychology, biology, chemistry, science, human nature. And I examined every piece of information I could, and where possible, I tested those theories out on myself so I could be sure if they were true or not to me. And what I found shocked me to my core. So much of what I've been taught, read in books and watched on TV was not the real truth, but the truth that certain organizations wish me to believe was true to further their particular agendas. I think a wonderful example of this is the concept of the science of calories. Back in the 80s and 90s, it was all about counting calories. Calories in and calories out, and that's how you lose weight. But now it's so laughable, you know. A calorie is a unit of heat, and what 100 calories of butter in the form of fat offers the body for sustenance is very different from 100 calories of celery. And is 100 calories of egg better for your cells biologically, for their well-being, than 100 calories of alcohol or ice cream? And I slowly woke up to the fact that I was being cleverly bamboozled, manipulated and influenced by science, statistics and marketing from governments, corporations and the media looking to serve their personal agendas rather than my well-being. And these corporations had paid off the research scientists, the associations that regulated industries, and the universities which taught what the regulating bodies declared to be the scientific truth, to market to me things in ways that I, as a naive and trusting consumer, would believe and act upon. I was a dumb sucker being screwed over, and for the most part I was naively unaware that it was even happening to me. Think about it. Why print smoking kills on a packet of cigarettes, yet still allow them to be sold? If they kill us, don't make them, or remove from them what makes them addictive and carcinogenic. Surely that will be a common sense what a common sense perspective might propose. And I became shocked at how corrupt and self-serving the world was, and that many of the universities, civil services, utility suppliers, defence contractors, agricultural conglomerates, medical Goliaths, and the media were all seemingly working together at a very high level to imprison me, whilst pretending to offer me the story that I was free, democratic, and living the dream. And it became clear to me that many of the offices of authority and knowledge that I'd been brought up to respect and trust were in fact part of the very establishment that was trying to keep me locked down with fear and conformity as a compliant consumer. Now, I'm not trying to sell you any of these theories. It's just what I discovered to be true for me. And if you want to, you should go and do your own research. All I'm saying is that how the world is being run made a lot more sense to me when I saw the true agendas that were being implemented, rather than just simply believing these authoritarian bodies had my wellness and happiness as their primary goal, as I had been taught in school. Now, way back in the mid-2000s, when I told my friends and my family about what I'd discovered, I said to them, did you know about banking corruption? Did you know about the plan to get rid of cash by switching to programmable digital currencies? Did you know about big pharma agendas to keep people unwell to profitably sell more drugs? You know, are you aware about how wars are being staged to fund the military complex? Did you know about digital IDs, universal basic income? Do you know about government plans to bankrupt small family-run companies? And my friends and my family would just laugh at me and say, John, don't be stupid. They would never do that. But it seems to me that they would do that, and they are doing that. I like that joke that says, what's the difference between a conspiracy theory and the truth? And the answer is about 6 months. Anyway, this course is not about politics. It's about anxiety. And I'm not saying you should believe any of this. Even I don't see myself as a conspiracy theorist. I see myself as a fascinated common sense life researcher. But here's the point that I'm trying to make, and I think is a big one. I've closely watched how people, governments, banks and corporations function. And very rarely did any of what they were doing make sense to my logical and complex brain. And I always thought, what's wrong with me? Why is it that all the best brains in government and industry are doing X, Y, Z, when the common sense thing to do would be ABC? What am I getting wrong? Yeah? How come whichever political party gets voted in, they still do the same stupid things? What's wrong with me? Okay. What am I missing? Why am I working so hard to fit into a system that I think is stupid? And years ago, I used to listen to the BBC News every morning while I was driving to work. However, I just found myself frequently confused about the decisions and the actions of the government. You know, despite being voted in and in power and considered intelligent, I struggled to make sense of their actions. And I assumed that it must have been me that was misunderstanding everything. But after all these years of research of how the world seems to operate, I had the startling realization that the majority of the world's population, they're just not very clever. They might think they are, okay? And they had been cleverly indoctrinated through schools and universities, funded by unaccountable governments and sometimes unelected organizations, corporations and regulating authorities, which decide to stipulate the curriculum of which version of science will be rolled out to suit their current agendas. And therefore, naive young students pop out of the system, primed to be consumer slaves for the system, whilst being sold the story that they're lucky to be safe, democratic, free, and living the dream. It's bloody clever, really. And it works because, energetically speaking, 50% of the population is below the energy level of 200 on the Hawkins map of consciousness, which means they are driven by fear and pride, and therefore they are easily tricked, they are easily placeboed, manipulated, sold to, and fearfully suppressed. And those above 200, their breakpoint, where energy becomes life-enhancing, were often too scared to rock the boat or to call out that corruption for fear of losing their well-paid jobs or having their accreditation or their licenses withdrawn. As I said earlier, you don't have to believe me, but what I'm doing in this video is sharing with you how a person without anxiety might think, purely to give you a few more perspectives. Now, if we jump back to when I was trying to write my book, I was in a bit of a predicament because over the years I'd grown to really love my spiritual practices, and I was fascinated by all my conspiracy research. And if I'm honest, doing therapy with anxious clients was not really my favorite way to spend my day, but it certainly paid the bills. And certainly after all the lockdowns where face-to-face therapy became less, which I loved doing, became less possible, and everything now is done through the internet, a lot of my passion sort of was taken away. But it paid the bills. So each night, as I sat down to write about anxiety and OCD, after working all day with anxiety and OCD, I just had zero motivation. Then one day, I was out on one of my ERP sensory deprivation walks, as I talk about in video 23, when a genius idea just popped up on my mind screen. And I do wonder these days where ideas and creativity truly come from, whether it's from the brain or if it's from the field of energy around us and nature, or both, I don't know. But my brain figured that I should merge all of the hardest clients I'd ever worked with to form the ultimate worst complex anxiety client. And it would be my job to find a way to break through all the barriers that person has by simply using logic and reason to interrupt the negative victim stories they were telling themselves, and so they could understand themselves and see life differently. I imagined how I might go about educating a person with anxiety or OCD or ADHD, GAD, pure O, depression, bipolar, and a complex personality to better understand what it is happening to them and how they may reverse it. And then how could I teach them the hardest thing of all? How might I teach them life skills required to live a better life? Because I believe behind most mental illness problems are basically poor life management skills, poor relationship skills, low self-worth, and communication skills that could be improved. Along with that, a lack of a well-articulated dream of what they selfishly desired for themselves. I also imagined how I might incorporate my passion for living a more spiritual, energy-based and libertarian view of life by sharing my true experiences of how I developed more self-esteem, more self-responsibility, and some form of faith. And doing this in such an interesting and stealthily manner as to not accidentally scare off the person or trigger their current brain configuration, which was usually rigidly defaulting to fear, doubt, and needing proof of everything. When, of course, many of these more esoteric perspectives are very hard to prove, just as love, trust, faith, and optimism are hard to prove, yet they are wonderful states to live in. Then suddenly, the project became interesting. It became challenging. It also became unique and exciting for me. And I told one of my friends about my plan, and he liked it. And he asked, how long do you think it will take to make? And I said, I don't know. And he said, will you write it or will you video it? And I said, initially I'd planned to write it, but now I have a better idea. I'm thinking of recording a video for each chapter of the book. And I decided to write the first chapter and then decide on the second chapter once it was finished. That way I didn't have to wait until I knew everything I was going to do before I started. And then at the end, I would grab all the words from all the videos and compile them into a more structured book. Which is funny, as now I have nearly 400,000 words of well-structured words written down, which is enough for 4 or 5 books. I've just got to get around to putting them all in order. Other decisions that I made were to share my experiences, to be really, really honest, but not to censor my work to favour political correctness or the internet algorithms or prevailing marketing fads. I would do what I felt right for me, so my heart would be it. I also chose to only make one video per month because I was working full-time and I knew I'd lose motivation if I overworked myself. And also because of one of my values is accountability. By telling my subscribers I would make one video per month, it forced me to make me do it by my own degree of accountability. And then I imagined my work was finished and that it was famous, and students and other therapists had asked me and liked it, okay, and they'd asked me to write deeply about everything I knew so they would have a comprehensive and definitive collection of my knowledge. So I thought to myself, well, I wouldn't want to write it all again, so what I'll do now is I'll assume that's what's happened, and I would make that piece of work now. I would talk about everything I knew. So people could skim through it and take what they wanted, or they could say, oh my God, I want to understand this, and they could go to whatever depth they wanted. And the final piece of the jigsaw happened by luck. A friend asked me how I would sell the course, and I said, oh, I'll cross that bridge once I've made it all. And he said, why don't you try to get people to help to fund you to create it? And I asked him how that might be possible, and that's when he pointed me towards the Patreon hosting site. So I put the first 6 videos up for free on YouTube so people could see if they liked my work, and then they could subscribe so I could then start to fund making the next video. And it worked pretty well. Another intention of mine right from the start was that I would always try to aim for a low-cost, high-value, many-user kind of business model. That way, if I can keep the price low and the quality high, it would be available to almost anybody at a price that shouldn't be an obstacle for most people to access. So there was no excuses for anybody around the world from starting to help themselves. Because I feel really passionate about there being less anxiety in the world. I think to a certain degree I've achieved this, but the obstacles that I now need to overcome are getting more people to sign up, because the internet algorithms block my work, as I'm not a doctor and my work is not really aligned with conventional medical protocols which treat anxiety, though often my work is more effective. Another problem I have is Patreon and PayPal are not accessible in many countries across Asia and the Middle East, where my work is very well received but hard to access. So I really need to consider how I might solve that problem. And after making this course, I was really surprised to find that it had profoundly changed me, deeply changed me. Okay, I now have a better understanding of myself. I feel even calmer and even more courageous than before I started. And having to almost be forced to put into words my thoughts and my feelings and my theories was very, very impactful. It forced me to really consider, what is it I'm trying to say, and how can I explain that, and how can I live that, and what experiences and what stories can I tell people about what I found when I did it. I also learned so much about presenting, writing, grammar, storytelling, filming, editing, motivation and creativity. And I did all this from a bedroom masquerading as my office in my house on my own, with no psychology or therapy accreditations, and with almost no cost except my time, which I tried not to waste by watching TV, being on social media, or playing computer games. And another thing that I lucked into, but turned out to be a fantastic strategy, was because each time I wrote a chapter, then made that film, and then immediately published that video, I was getting instant feedback from my audience to tell me if I was on the right track or not. And because I was being propelled to deeply consider what to write about, and being forced to articulate my views on many topics, and to be able to substantiate my concepts, I would test out my new theories as I were working with clients. And of course, if they worked, I would include them into my next videos. And this meant not only was I growing by questioning my own beliefs and stories, I was also receiving real-world validation on them. I'd stumbled upon a most incredible way of continuing to work as a therapist, right, and to write, test, and hone my theories, and then to live them myself, and then to publish them before I'd even finished writing the whole course. And I would imagine that if I'd have sat down, took a year off to just spend writing a book, then none of this would have happened. Next up, I learned how fickle creativity is. Sometimes it comes, sometimes it doesn't, but you have to make space for it. You have to sit there and write, no matter how hard that might be. Okay, and I've got to be honest and say I mostly didn't like writing all the scripts. I don't like doing this filming even more, okay? And I found the editing of the videos to be very difficult and very boring because I'm not really creative in that way. However, once the video was uploaded and published, I had the most beautiful feeling of achievement that outweighed all of that effort and will be there for me forevermore. I recently heard an interview with a famous author who, when asked how much she loved writing, she replied, "I don't like writing at all, but I do deeply love having written." I can really understand that sentiment completely. And finally, I learned how absolutely exhausting being continuously creative for 5 years can be. Very often, a video like this might take me 7 to 10 days of constant writing and 3 or 4 nights, a couple of days to film and another day to edit. So next up, I'm going to take a 6-month break to recharge my batteries and to consider what my next plan of action is and to explore what new things I'd like to learn and then report back to and make videos on. I'll still be posting articles here on Patreon. I'll still be answering your questions, and there are many short videos and animations I still like to make. So if you have any requests, can you write them in the notes section under this video? And so as